Tonight, Iran's savage missile revenge for Khamenei.
At 11:47 p.m., federal agents made a discovery that would expose the largest cartel infiltration of American law enforcement and government in recorded history. What they found in a sealed steel box in a Phoenix warehouse would reshape everything they thought they knew about power, corruption, and the battle for control of the southwestern border. Over the next 72 hours, more than 2,000 federal agents, 30 SWAT teams, and multiple task forces executed simultaneous operations across Arizona, New Mexico, and Southern California. They seized $847 million in laundered cartel proceeds, over 14 tons of cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, and methamphetamine, and arrested 43 individuals, including one sitting state governor, 2 federal judges, and an entire cartel command structure that had been operating in plain sight. This is how the second-largest criminal empire ever discovered on American soil was dismantled. This is Operation Crimson Gate. The story began not with the final raid, but 3 months earlier, on a freezing night in Tucson, Arizona. It was 4:32 a.m. when the first flashbang detonated. The street was empty. No witnesses. Just the low hum of distant highway traffic and the occasional sodium light casting orange halos across cracked pavement. The cartel had chosen this location deliberately, a converted pharmaceutical distribution center on the edge of industrial Tucson, surrounded by identical warehouses that no one watched. But the FBI had been watching for 8 months. Silently, patiently, learning every pattern, every guard rotation, every truck that arrived under darkness. When the breach team hit the loading dock door, they moved like a coordinated machine. Black fatigues, ballistic vests, assault rifles held tight. No hesitation. No mercy. The door exploded inward. More flashbangs erupted inside the warehouse, filling it with white light and concussive force. The roar was deafening. Within seconds, agents were pouring through the breach, clearing rooms in practiced tactical formation. Suspects scrambled. Some tried to run. One man grabbed a duffel bag stuffed with stacks of cash and made for a back exit. An agent tackled him before he took 5 steps. Another suspect moved toward a steel panel in the floor. The door was already locked by an agent's boot. In the first 30 minutes, they found it. Behind a false wall in the storage area, concealed beneath pallets of what appeared to be legitimate pharmaceutical shipments, lay the heart of the operation. Industrial-scale drug manufacturing equipment. Pill presses that could produce 200,000 fentanyl counterfeit pills per hour. Massive vats of liquid narcotics. Vacuum-sealed bricks of cocaine stacked like inventory. But more important than the drugs, more important than the $4.2 million in cash they discovered in a buried safe, was what sat in a single lead-lined steel box, locked with a biometric fingerprint scanner. Inside that box were encrypted hard drives. The agents didn't know it yet, but what was recorded on those drives would connect the Sonora Cartel, a ruthless Mexican drug organization that had been operating in the shadows of the Sinaloa Cartel for 2 decades, directly to the highest levels of Arizona state government. It would expose a network so intricate, so deliberate, that it made traditional corruption look like child's play. This wasn't corruption. This was command-level collusion. This was engineered treason. By 6:15 a.m., as dawn broke over the desert, DEA agents had secured the warehouse. They had already seized 2.3 tons of cocaine, 847 kilograms of heroin, and over 6 million fentanyl pills. The preliminary street value was estimated at $180 million. But the real value lay in those encrypted drives, now carefully packaged in an evidence container and being rushed to the FBI Cyber Forensics Lab in Phoenix under armed guard. 47 miles away, inside a nondescript federal building in downtown Phoenix, a team of 6 forensic analysts began their work at 9:22 a.m. The lead analyst was Special Agent Marcus Webb, 13 years with the Bureau, a man who had cracked darknet encryption, Russian money laundering schemes, and terrorist communication networks. He had never seen encryption like this. Military-grade, quantum-resistant algorithms. The kind of security that suggested not just sophisticated criminals, but someone with access to classified technology. It took them 4 hours. At 1:18 p.m., the first drive unlocked. What they saw made Webb's blood run cold. Digital maps. Dozens of them. Detailed schematics of drug tunnels running beneath the Arizona-Mexico border. Logistics charts showing shipment schedules, quantities, and delivery points spanning across Arizona, New Mexico, California, and Nevada. Bank routing documents showing money flowing through shell companies, ghost corporations, and fake nonprofit foundations. But there was something else. Something that made this operation exponential in scale and criminality. Authorization logs. Every major operation, every tunnel construction, every large shipment, every corruption payment to law enforcement officers, each one had been digitally signed, cryptographically verified, and the signature was always the same, a single private encryption key, a key that, when traced through the cartel's internal systems, belonged to one person, Governor Richard Aldridge. The realization hit the room like a physical force. The governor of Arizona. Not merely complicit, not merely accepting bribes. Aldridge wasn't a corrupt politician taking cartel money. He was a command structure operative. His digital signature appeared on decisions about where drug tunnels would
believed that a single gunshot could bring down an entire underground empire that had existed.
Kingpin in Mexico now faced a 15-defendant federal indictment. Wiretaps, undercover operations, extensive surveillance, and swift enforcement action led to enormous seizures in this case.
Financial architecture. Over $3 billion had been laundered through Aldridge's
existed for a
network
full
in the past 5
decade,
years.
right at
They traced it through restaurant chains in Phoenix and Tucson, through fake agriculture
the heart of America.
in Arizona.
DEA officials say they seized 733 pounds worth of the street drug. They claim this is the single largest meth bust in state history. The DEA says agents seized these drugs from a Lakewood home along with other equipment to make more meth. This all comes as part of a larger investigation.
From cartel-controlled entities and distributed almost nothing to any actual community. It was a masterpiece of financial
The story with a
engineering,
warning bell
and
from
Aldridge
Fox
had
News
designed
that
every
from nose of the
Webb pulled up a
authorities.
detailed
Southern
org chart
Texas
from the third
shattered
drive.
long
It showed
before
the Sonora
sunrise.
cartel's command structure, the cartel leadership
Of a 37-year-old
regional
woman.
commanders,
Unmarked
supply chain
SUVs,
managers,
armored vehicles.
distribution networks. And there, at the intersection of everything, was Aldridge. Not reporting to the cartel, directing them, making operational decisions, approving supply routes, authorizing the movement of narcotics across state lines. One analyst whispered, "This is bigger than we thought." Webb nodded slowly. "This is bigger than anyone thought. Get this to the director. Now." By 3:47 p.m. that same day, an emergency national command center was established at the FBI's Phoenix field office. It was a secured facility, windowless, with every communication encrypted and isolated from outside networks. The walls were covered with digital screens showing maps, organizational charts, financial flows, and surveillance photographs. By 6:30 p.m., representatives from the FBI, DEA, ICE, and Homeland Security were seated around a central table. The briefing took 3 hours. What they were looking at was unprecedented. Not just a cartel operating in the United States. Not just a politician on the cartel payroll. They were looking at an entire parallel government. A shadow law enforcement apparatus that Aldridge had built, run by corrupt officials, that existed to serve the Sonora cartel's interests instead of the people of Arizona. The corruption was systematic. The DEA identified 12 corrupt federal drug agents who had been feeding cartel information about surveillance operations, raid schedules, and undercover operations. They had prevented 34 major narcotics seizures. They had allowed shipments totaling 340 tons of cocaine to pass through federal checkpoints unmolested. The FBI identified 8 corrupt federal judges. Judges who had dismissed cases against cartel members, who had authorized wiretaps against Aldridge's political rivals, who had sealed grand jury indictments before they could go public. Border Patrol discovered that 47 agents, entire patrol units, had been compromised. Patrols were conveniently unavailable when cartel convoys crossed the border. Maintenance schedules for sensor systems were mysteriously timed to coincide with major drug movements. Reports were altered. Logs were falsified. A pattern emerged that showed the southern Arizona border had been turned into a controlled corridor for Sonora cartel operations. And at the center of it all was Governor Aldridge. He had been in office for 12 years. He had run unopposed in his last election. He controlled state law enforcement budgets, hiring decisions, and policy. He had used that power to build a cartel-serving infrastructure that would have taken Mexico's criminal organizations decades to construct on their own. The decision was made at 11:53 p.m. The operation would be massive, simultaneous, overwhelming. They would strike with such force and such coordination that there would be no time to destroy evidence, no opportunity for warning, no chance for escape. The codename was already chosen, Operation Crimson Gate. The target window was 72 hours. The execution would begin at 5 a.m. Across the Southwest, federal agents didn't sleep. They prepared. Tactical teams rehearsed breach sequences. Cyber specialists prepared digital seizure protocols for server farms and communication hubs. Financial investigators prepared to freeze over $1.2 billion in suspected cartel assets. Prosecutors prepared federal indictments. And intelligence teams prepared to brief helicopter pilots, armored vehicle commanders, and the over 2,000 federal agents who would participate in what would become the largest coordinated law enforcement operation ever conducted against organized crime on American soil. At 4:47 a.m., in a command center 20 miles north of Phoenix, a senior FBI official stood before a digital map of Arizona, New Mexico, California, and southern Nevada. The map was covered in red markers. Each marker represented a target: a drug warehouse, a cartel safe house, a money laundering operation, a human trafficking transit hub, a migrant smuggling coordination center, a hidden drug superlab, over 137 individual targets across 4 states. All units, came the radio transmission at 4:59 a.m. This is command. Crimson Gate is authorized. Execute on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Execute. What happened in the next 6 hours would reshape the entire Southwest. In Phoenix, a SWAT team breached a mansion in the Paradise Valley neighborhood where Aldridge maintained a private residence. They found encrypted servers, financial records, and $23 million in cash hidden in a subfloor safe. Aldridge was arrested at 5:43 a.m., taken into custody without resistance. In Tucson, a combined DEA and FBI team raided a cartel superlab hidden inside an abandoned copper mine. The lab was producing fentanyl on an industrial scale. Agents seized another 8.7 tons of pure fentanyl powder, enough to kill 2.3 billion people. The cartel chemist, a man named Vicente Ruelas who had been operating the lab, was captured trying to flee into a tunnel system. Agents found him 200 meters underground in pitch darkness. In Las Cruces, New Mexico, a coordinated strike hit a cartel money laundering center disguised as a restaurant supply company. Agents seized servers, ledgers, and $340 million in suspected cartel proceeds. 3 cartel financial managers surrendered immediately. One attempted to escape through a back door and was apprehended after a brief chase. In San Diego, California, ICE agents and DEA officers coordinated with Border Patrol to conduct raids on human trafficking and migrant smuggling operations that were being used as cover for massive narcotics movements. They discovered over 280 individuals being held in forced labor conditions. They identified 14 immigration officers who had been compensated by the cartel to facilitate illegal border crossings. In El Paso, Texas, federal agents moved on what intelligence indicated was the primary coordination hub for the cartel's drug tunnel network. They found blueprints for 17 underground passages running beneath the Rio Grande. They discovered that the cartel had been operating these tunnels with the knowledge of the local Border Patrol sector chief, a man named Colonel James Hartley, who had been receiving $50,000 per month in cartel payments. In the mountains north of Nogales, Arizona, federal agents discovered a massive cartel fortress, a compound hidden deep in the desert that served as the regional headquarters for the Sonora Cartel's U.S. operations. The compound had armored buildings, surveillance systems, and a small army of armed cartel members. When agents moved to breach the perimeter, they encountered gunfire. A 20-minute firefight erupted. 3 federal agents were wounded. 8 cartel members were killed. The remaining cartel fighters surrendered after tactical teams moved into position. The operation had moved into what commanders called Phase 2. Across Arizona and New Mexico, smaller raids continued. By 2:30 p.m., federal agents had executed 137 individual operations. They had arrested 218 individuals. They had seized 14.2 tons of cocaine, 3.1 tons of heroin, 67 million fentanyl pills, 2.8 tons of methamphetamine, $847 million in cash, 17 military-grade weapons, and enough computer hardware and encrypted servers to require an entire warehouse for evidence storage. But the real impact wasn't measured in seizures. It was measured in the systematic dismantling of a shadow government. Over the following weeks, as seized servers were analyzed and financial records were examined, the true scope of the conspiracy became clear. Beyond Governor Aldridge, federal investigators arrested 2 federal judges. United States District Judge Daniel Morales and federal magistrate Patricia Hernandez had both been receiving direct payments from the cartel in exchange for dismissing cases and authorizing surveillance against Aldridge's political enemies. Judge Morales had dismissed 17 different cases against cartel members. Judge Hernandez had sealed 43 grand jury indictments. The Arizona State Police identified that 17 senior officers, including the deputy chief of operations, had been on the cartel payroll. The FBI identified 12 corrupt DEA agents, 8 corrupt federal ICE agents, and 47 Border Patrol agents who had been compromised. The Phoenix Police Department discovered that the chief of the Narcotics Division had been receiving bribes. Pima County Sheriff's Department found that multiple patrol sergeants had been passing cartel information to criminal organizations. It wasn't just corruption. It was a parallel law enforcement apparatus. A second police force, designed by the cartel and managed by Aldridge, existed solely to protect cartel operations and suppress rival criminal organizations and legitimate law enforcement. For 12 years, this parallel system had operated in near-total secrecy, turning Arizona into what one federal prosecutor described as a cartel-controlled state disguised as an American democracy. The financial investigation revealed even more staggering criminality. The Sonora Cartel, through Aldridge's network, had been moving an average of 340 tons of narcotics per month through Arizona without federal detection. They had been laundering $250 million per month through legitimate appearing businesses. They had been trafficking an estimated 4,000 humans per year through the state for sexual exploitation and forced labor. The operation had been designed with systematic brilliance. The cartel had identified that Governor Aldridge was ambitious but financially insecure. Aldridge had inherited a modest family business and dreamed of wealth and power. The cartel had approached him through intermediaries, offering him a simple proposition: allow cartel operations to function unmolested within Arizona, help select which officials would be corrupted, and in return, receive a percentage of cartel profits. Within 5 years, Aldridge was worth over $800 million. He owned properties across the United States and internationally. He had created a personal security force. He had become untouchable, or so he believed. What Aldridge hadn't understood was that he had become expendable. The moment his usefulness was compromised, the moment a single cartel member was arrested and began cooperating with authorities, the entire structure would collapse. And that's exactly what happened. A mid-level cartel manager named Gabriel Soto had been arrested on an unrelated federal narcotics charge, facing a mandatory 30-year sentence. Soto had agreed to cooperate with the DEA. He provided the initial information about Aldridge's involvement.
ICE agent opened fire after a confrontation involving a vehicle.
Their spotlight slicing across the darkness.
Investigators to the hard drives. And with his testimony,
to have revealed the real threat that this officer was facing.
The trial of Governor Aldridge lasted 6 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Emails,
while the incident immediately sparked public scrutiny and protest.
Massive industrial warehouse outside Loretto.
Digital signatures, testimony from turned cartel
He fired in self-defense.
The defense attempted to claim that Aldridge had been coerced, that he had been a victim of cartel.
All these cases, these serious crimes involving children, when those entrusted with protecting the law become accomplices to crime,
personally ordered the disappearance of 3 people who threatened to expose the operation. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: money laundering, drug trafficking conspiracy, bribery, abuse of public office, conspiracy to commit human trafficking, ordering murders. The judge sentenced Governor Aldridge to 240 years without possibility of parole. He would spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary, his wealth seized, his legacy destroyed. The other prosecutions followed a similar pattern. Judge Morales received 80 years. Judge Hernandez received 110 years. The deputy chief of Arizona State Police received 55 years. The chief of the Phoenix Narcotics Division received 32 years. The Border Patrol Sector Chief in El Paso, Colonel Hartley, received 40 years. Across the Southwest, corrupt officials who had thought themselves untouchable were convicted, sentenced, and imprisoned. The Sonora Cartel's Arizona operations were dismantled almost completely. The organization would take years to rebuild its infrastructure. The drug tunnels collapsed and flooded. The safe houses were seized. The money laundering networks were frozen and confiscated. The human trafficking supply chains were interrupted, allowing hundreds of victims to escape exploitation. But what made Operation Crimson Gate truly significant wasn't the arrests or the seizures. It was what it revealed about the vulnerability of institutional power to organized crime infiltration. Governor Aldridge had not seized control of Arizona through violence or revolution. He had simply been given money. Lots of money. Enough money to purchase the loyalty of enough officials, judges, and law enforcement officers to turn an entire state into a cartel stronghold. It revealed that democracy itself had a price. That the institutions designed to protect citizens could be quietly repurposed to serve criminals if enough of the right people were compromised. That the badge, the symbol of justice, could be worn by men and women who worked for cartels instead of for the people. The aftermath of Operation Crimson Gate brought significant changes. The FBI and DEA implemented new financial monitoring protocols for all senior government officials. The director of the FBI appointed a special task force to investigate cartel infiltration across all 50 states. Congress passed legislation increasing penalties for public officials who conspire with criminal organizations. The Arizona State Police underwent a complete internal audit and restructuring, with over 200 officers subjected to enhanced background investigations. But perhaps most significantly, the operation sparked a national conversation about how thoroughly organized crime had penetrated American institutions. Subsequent investigations found cartel influence in other states, not at the level of Arizona, but present nonetheless. Corrupt local officials, compromised judges, law enforcement officers on cartel payroll. The discovery that Aldridge had operated with relative impunity for 12 years forced a reckoning with the sobering reality that America's institutions were far more vulnerable to organized crime corruption than anyone had previously acknowledged. The human cost of Operation Crimson Gate and the corruption it exposed was staggering. Over the 12 years of Aldridge's operation, an estimated 63,000 people died from fentanyl overdoses that could have been prevented if the drug seizures had been made. Thousands of victims suffered exploitation through the human trafficking and migrant smuggling operations that the cartel had run unopposed. Entire neighborhoods in Phoenix, Tucson, and other Arizona cities were ravaged by methamphetamine and fentanyl epidemics that law enforcement, compromised by the cartel's influence, had failed to properly address. Families were destroyed, futures were stolen, communities were poisoned, and it all happened because power, it turns out, does not always require open violence. Sometimes it only requires silence. Sometimes it only requires ambition. Sometimes it only requires a man willing to trade his oath for a fortune, and enough people willing to look the way when institutions are quietly repurposed into instruments of criminal enterprise. The story of Operation Crimson Gate is, at its heart, a story about what happens when the guardians become the guardians. When the people tasked with protecting a state become its greatest threat. When democracy is slowly traded away, not in a dramatic coup, but in a series of small compromises, encrypted communications, and digital signatures that authorize the transformation of a sovereign state into a cartel fortress. Governor Aldridge, now 58 years old, sits in a federal penitentiary in Colorado, his cell 7 by 9 feet, his future measured only in endless days. The judges he compromised are imprisoned. The officers he corrupted are imprisoned. The cartel members he enabled are imprisoned or dead. But the lesson remains: institutional power can be captured. Democracy can be subverted. The United States itself, for all its strength and resources, contains vulnerabilities that ruthless criminals are willing to exploit. And the only defense is constant vigilance, institutional integrity, and a commitment to the principle that no official, no matter how powerful, no matter how elected or appointed, is above accountability. This story is a fictional dramatization created to illustrate the dangers of organized crime infiltration and political corruption. The characters are invented. The operation details are fictional. But the warning is real. In the spaces where corruption is allowed to grow unchecked, democracies become kingdoms of shadow government. And by the time the corruption is discovered, the damage inflicted on innocent lives is almost irreversible. If you're still watching, now you understand what Operation Crimson Gate revealed. A state captured, a government corrupted, institutions weaponized, and the terrible cost of believing that it could never happen in America.